Well, good morning. This is the first in our 4-week series on good news. When you watch television or listen to the radio, you pick up the news and you think, does nobody have any good news? We see of disasters, we see of wars, we see young men whose lives have been cut short and women who've been abused in terrible ways. We see chemical disasters like the one in Hungary this week. And we cry out and we say, does nobody have any good news anymore? Is all the news bad? I want to tell you over these 4 weeks, 4 stories of 4 people who met Jesus and found that meeting Jesus was good news. And I want to help you to understand how that can be good news for you in your life today. Because the questions they have and the questions you have are pretty much the same. They're very similar. And you will see in these people things that you see in your own life. And you'll find that as they met Jesus and they heard and received good news, that same good news can come to you today. And at the end of my message, I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond and say, yes, I will accept the good news that Jesus can bring into my life. I will start to follow him and be obedient to him. I will trust him. And I'll explain to you how you can trust him and how you can respond to this. And so we'll do that at the end of this message. Okay? This is good news for you today. I want to start with a lady who, sadly, her husband had died. And this happens, I've met lots of people through the years whose partner, whom they've lived with and shared their life with for many years, has died. And I know that this woman had 2 questions on her mind. Because when I've talked with people in this situation, I've found that they all have the same 2 questions. The first one is a very practical one. How will I manage? And I think when this woman's husband died, she said, how will I manage? How can I cope now my husband has died? Will I be able to make ends meet? Will I be able to buy enough food and clothes and keep a roof over my head? And it moves on very quickly from that to how will I cope without the company and companionship of this person whom I've loved? That leads into the second question. Will I ever see him again? And you've asked that question when somebody you've loved has died. A parent, a grandparent, a brother, sister, someone whom you've been close to. They've died and you've wondered, will I ever see them again? Is this the end, or is there something more to come? Well, for this woman, she would have been asking those 2 questions. She would have been saying, how will I manage and will I ever see him again? And of course she knew she was going to manage because she had a son. And her son, we think, was probably a teenager. And he took up with her the responsibility for the household. She didn't have a big family, there were just the 2 of them. But now she's a single parent. Together they manage. And they were coping quite nicely. Until he died. And that's always the biggest tragedy in anybody's life. The death of a child. There is no greater sorrow than the sorrow of a bereaved parent. And she's experiencing this. And she's got those 2 questions again. How will I manage? Now my son has gone from me. Will I be able to make ends meet on my own? And will I see him again? These are the 2 questions in her mind. She lived in a town called Nain, which was in Galilee in the time of Jesus. And Jesus comes to this town. And as he's coming through the town, the funeral's coming along the street. Jesus and his disciples, they stop to pay their respect. They hear the story of this woman. Her only son has died, and his heart goes out to them. And the Bible tells us that he was filled with pity. And he goes, and in a most remarkable way, he answers the two questions in her mind. Because what Jesus does, which you and I don't generally do this when we see a funeral, Jesus goes across the funeral party. And he does something which you've got to have confidence in your Heavenly Father to do this. Don't try this at home, boys and girls. Because he goes up to the funeral party and he stops it. Just, whoa, wait there. And of course it's not a funeral like ours where we have a car with a coffin and then inside that's the body. No, it's like some of those that you see on TV when you see pictures from the Middle East. And they still do it the same way today as they did then. And there'd be 4 or 5 men carrying the body on a stretcher thing on their shoulders. And the body would just be covered with a cloth. And you've seen it, right? I remember Ayatollah Khomeini's funeral, and this was happening, and goodness, you never thought the body was going to get to the grave. It was just, the arms were going, it was heartbreaking. People are crying out. Jesus goes to this procession. And he stops it. And he takes the boy's hand and says, "Get up." And the boy looks up and says, And what was a time of mourning turns into a celebration. As everybody cries out and says, "Oh, Jesus has raised this boy to life. This widow's only son." But as he did it, he showed the answer to those two questions. First, he showed the answer to the question, is there life after death? This woman would have gone to a rabbi and said to him, "Rabbi, will I ever see my husband again? Will I ever see my boy again?" And the rabbi would say, "Well, on the one hand, Rabbi Ben Joseph, a Pharisee, says you definitely will see your husband again. You definitely will see your boy again, because he's a Pharisee and believes in the resurrection. Whereas Rabbi Ben Jacob, he's a Sadducee, and he doesn't believe in the resurrection. So he says you definitely will not see your son again. When we get to the end of life, that's it. Nothing else happens." There are people today who think that, aren't there? There are some people who think that when we die, and that's it. Nothing else happens. And others think when we die, well, maybe we come back again. Or maybe we're raised, or maybe we go to heaven, or maybe our spirits move around. People have all sorts of views, but Jesus comes with a very definite answer. Because when he raises the boy to life, he says in effect, there is a resurrection. The death of our body is not the end of life. And then later on, of course, you and I know the end of the story. We've read to the end of the book. And we know that when Jesus himself was put to death, he rose to life. And he promised his followers that they will go to heaven.